I'm Lisa Mullins, and this is The World. A judge in Chile has indicted a former U.S. military officer in a murder case that dates back to the 1970s. The indictment accuses former Navy Captain Ray Davis of being involved in the killing of two American citizens in Chile. Journalists Charles Horman and Frank Teruggi were detained and killed shortly after Chile's 1973 military coup. U.S. officials in the country at the time were in contact with the Chilean military, and the indictment draws on evidence from several declassified American documents from the period. The case inspired the 1982 Oscar-winning movie Missing. Charles Horman's widow is Joyce Horman. She described for us today how the couple was caught up in the coup that toppled Chilean President Salvador Allende.
It was a very, very frightening situation. There were tanks rumbling in the street, there were gunshots, and the radio was blaring that certain people should be turned in to the local police. Charlie had just taken our friend Terry Simon out to the coast to show her the coast, and they didn't get back until a week later. And they came back driven by Ray Davis.
This is the Navy
the indicted.
Who has been indicted.
Yeah, exactly.
Why did he drive them back?
Well, he had passage through all of this violence, and he was talking to his military cohorts about this. And Charles and Terry were privy to some of their boasting about how well the coup went and what a wonderful thing it was. That Monday, I was off getting some groceries and some other things, and when I got back, it was the next day because I got caught, and I didn't get back at all to our home that night. When I got back, the house had been completely ransacked, and it later unfolded that Charles had been there, and the neighbor who happened to be leaving her home when the truckload of soldiers abducted Charlie, her taxi home followed the truck that took Charles, and it went to the stadium.
And you, just to say what you had been through, I mean, when you were caught out on the street trying to get home, this was after the curfew, and you had to hide behind a stoop for hours to avoid being shot.
In a very cold stairwell, sitting on the cold stone. Amazingly enough, there was a view of the lights blaring over the stadium, which was a very eerie sight. It was a concentration camp, and they were being kept in the very cold cellars and in very bad circumstances.
When you were pursuing where Charlie was taken, your husband Charles was taken, you talked to U.S. officials, naturally. You're a U.S. citizen. Tell us about who you spoke with, and tell us about this particular man who has now been indicted by the Chilean court. This is the former U.S. Navy Captain Ray Davis.
Well, I located Terry, and we conferred about this, and she said, Ray Davis offered to help if there was anything. And so we thought that was appropriate to go not only to Ray Davis, but to the ambassador of the United States. And Ray Davis invited us to his home for dinner and he said he was going to invite Admiral Huidobro so that we could, in fact, ask this high official about Charlie and whether or not he knew where he was or what had happened to him.
This admiral is a Chilean admiral.
Chilean admiral. As it turned out, the Chilean admiral did not show up for dinner, but Ray Davis put us both up that evening.
I guess now in hindsight, I wonder, 38 years later, if your view of what happened that evening when you were at Ray Davis's home, if that has changed.
It certainly puts a different light on our going to him. When we went to him, one of his questions was, please give me a list of all of Charlie's friends because we should investigate and talk to them about Charlie's disappearance. Now, that was a wrong question. And now, looking back on it from this indictment, it's confirmation of how wrong it felt at that time. And yet, we were in no position to actually walk away from potential help, and Ray Davis was potential help for us.
You have said and written that you always thought that Chile's military would look to an American official before they killed an American. What is the evidence right now around your husband's death and who is culpable?
Well, the Chileans, they were looking to be recognized by the U.S. government. Why would they murder an American citizen at the same time. It seemed like a contradiction. And so we have always been looking for the connection that must have been made by the Chilean military with some American official that made them think that it wasn't going to be a huge problem if they murdered Charles Horman.
Is it, by the way, that you want to know how he died or why he died?
Well, who gave the order and why, I think, is pertinent to all Americans. Because if, in fact, this American, Ray Davis, had something to do with fingering my husband, then it's something that Americans cannot want to have happen. And the thread of truth has to be completely unraveled here for us all to know.
Joyce Horman, whose husband Charles was murdered after the 1973 coup in Chile.